What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like magic, and you have asked me for it over and over this season, and I think I'm ready to go ahead and give in. Today, we are finally going to talk about goblins. And there's a couple of cool things about this deck. First, it's rotation proof, so no cards from Kaladesh or Amonkhet block or anything else you have to worry about being completely invalid in like 6 weeks. So you got that going for you, but just as good. It's also really budget. It's like $35 on TCG Player right now. Proud sponsors of the channel as usual. If you're interested in checking out the deck list or you want to go ahead and pick up the list for yourself, make sure you click the first link in the description down there. It'll take you over to their website where you can buy the deck for the cheapest price you'll find it online. And now might be the time to pick it up before it becomes the default best red aggro deck in the format and the prices rise accordingly. So make sure you check out that link down there. It helps out the channel when you do it. And aside from that, you can like the video, share it around, or check out the Patreon if you really like my ish. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Now, usually the way I do these aggro decks is I like to start from the bottom of the curve, kind of work our way up, you know, but I'm actually going to take the opposite approach this time and go ahead and talk about Siege Gang Commander way up there at 5 mana, because I'm going to mention this card a bunch of times over the course of the video. You know, I made this my #1, like, most improved card after rotation for a reason, because I think this deck looks really, really healthy in the fall, and this card is a big part of that. First of all, the thing is a board in a box by itself. You know, you get 4 bodies on 1 card. That makes it really easy to go wide. That makes it awesome even in multiples. You know, you'll never feel bad about pulling multiple Siege Gangs as long as you can cast them. It's pretty much always good. Plus, it synergizes with itself, and not only that, all the other cards in the deck that want to sacrifice goblins for some value or another. And one more thing, you put 1 Lord, like an Anthem effect, on the battlefield, and suddenly this thing has 9 power all told between the 4 bodies. So there's just so many ways that Siege Gang is ridiculous. And there's also meta-dependent reasons why this is crazy, because it's really good against Settle the Wreckage. For a couple of reasons, you know. There's the obvious reason that this allows you to win the game without actually having to attack, and that's good enough against Settle. But I had somebody the other day in the comments section of the most improved cards after rotation video. They were like, this isn't good against Settle because all the decks that play Settle the Wreckage are mostly control decks, and they're not going to let you resolve this. I could give you that point, but let's say that you play Siege Gang Commander on your first main phase before your attack step. Then you force the control player into a tough situation. You know, if they counter your Siege Gang Commander, then they're probably not going to have enough mana to settle the wreckage that turn. You get in with all your guys. But if they don't counter Siege Gang Commander, they just let you get away on board to win the game without having to worry about settle in the first place. So it's kind of a damned if they do, damned if they don't situation against control decks on most turns. But mind you, this is actually good against settle in a third way. You know, if we ever actually do get our wreckage settled in a game, then we can just play Siege Gang Commander and get right back on board. Again, that's 4 bodies and an easy way to win without actually having to attack. Or we can blow away small creatures and clear a path for our bigger stuff. There's just so many things that Siege Gang can do. We definitely play the full playset of this. It's maybe the most important card in the deck. But every tribal aggro deck needs a Lord, and we've got like the fattest one in the format. We're going to play 4 copies of Goblin Trashmaster here because of course we are. You know, this is a pretty sturdy body on a Lord. 3/3 is not bad, especially in comparison to all the other Lords in the format. You know, it takes a little bit longer to actually get to your Trashmaster than it takes most tribal decks to get to their Lord, but it's still well worth it to play this guy. One thing I like about Trashmaster is that it's actually really good, like right now. Like for the next 6 weeks, this will blow up part of Kieran's and Godfair's Gifts and the occasional Scrap Heap Scrounger and stuff. You know, there's just a lot of reasons why you might want to have something that busts artifacts in your deck right now. And even after rotation, we're going to lose a Braid, but thanks to Trashmaster, we'll still have a main deck, like game 1 way of taking out artifacts in our red deck. So that's pretty sweet too. Now, I've already shown you 4 copies of a 5-drop and 4 copies of a 4-drop, so it may look like we're more of a mid-range deck than an aggro deck, but we can actually push the land count down pretty low in here, thanks to the fact that we're playing a bunch of cards that actually help us get mana or reduce the cost of our creatures and all that. So I'm going to go ahead and show you the 4 copies of Skirk Prospector, the 4 copies of Wily Goblin, and of course, 4 copies of Goblin Warchief. Warchief is like the only reason that I had to say that Siege Gang is maybe the best card in the deck, because Warchief has just been ridiculously overperforming for me game after game. I've seen a lot of preliminary Goblins lists that play like 2 or 3 Goblin Warchief, and I think that that is foolish. I actually think 4 is the correct number here, because we've got big stuff that we want to play ahead of curve. Again, this is really good with Siege Gang Commander. It's awesome with Trash Master. You don't even have to drop a land. The play after you play War Chief to get into Trash Master on the next turn. That's very important a lot of the time, and really all of the play lines and turn sequences that War Chief gives us are insanely important to the deck. I've come to believe that this is one of, if not the, most important Goblin in the entire list. War Chief is going to allow us to double spell a lot of the time the turn after we play it if we don't just drop a land and go Siege Gang Commander on turn 4, which is good enough play by itself. We can drop a land and go Trash Master into a 2-drop Goblin, which is also really good considering all of our Gobos have haste. And don't forget, by the way, that War Chief gives itself haste. And even though a 3-mana 2/2 haste isn't much, it'll still help us pile on some early damage. And as you play the deck, you'll find more and more of these cool turn sequences that War Chief makes possible. Like another cool one, while we're on the subject, is turn 3 War Chief into turn 4 War Chief and Trash Master. That's awesome. So again, as you play the deck, you'll see there are loads of these cool turn sequences that not only cards like War Chief give us, but also Wily Goblin and Skirk Prospector. Obviously, going Skirk Prospector into Wily Goblin gives us a turn 3 Siege Gang Commander. That's pretty awesome, but it also allows us to explode on board with a bunch of little goblins if we want to do that. And Wily Goblin is especially important for getting the most out of our early turns. All the way up until turn 4 or 5, we can do some pretty ludicrous stuff if we got a Wily Goblin and a treasure token on turn 2. Now, I'm also running 4 copies of Dark Dweller Oracle in the deck, and I'm not actually sure, after getting in some reps here, that 4 is the right number. And yeah, you're not mistaken, this is one of the best cards in the deck, absolutely, but it's pretty mana intensive. You know, you have to have mana to activate it, at least the 1 mana for 1 creature, and then you have to have mana to cast whatever you rip off the top with it if that's not a land. So sometimes this ends up being like a 4 or 5 drop, and it's not particularly good in multiples, so I think we might be able to drop this down to 3 or even 2 copies. But that said, it kind of sounds like blasphemy to a lot of people. You do want to see the card very, very often, and it's a great way to just get what amounts to extra gas in the late game, which pretty much any aggro deck would kill for, so you do want to play the card, don't get me wrong. A couple of pro tips about this card for your convenience. First of all, Oracle is really best used when you're swinging in and all of your mana is untapped, so that you have mana to activate him, multiple times if you have to, but also cast anything that you rip off the top during your second main phase. And on that note, remember, don't play a land if you plan on sacrificing anything to Oracle that turn, because if you've already played a land, you obviously can't play the lands you rip off the top, so just keep that in mind too. But we've only got a couple more creatures to cover in the deck, so I might as well go ahead and tell you about the 4 copies of Fanatical Firebrand. This is still a fine card, 1/1 haste is at least okay, gets you on the board and attacking as quickly as possible. Once you get a Trash Master out, this is actually a pretty decent body, at least it hits for more damage than it did. Sometimes you'll sacrifice this to kill Alana War Elves, or just to deal the last point of damage to your opponent. That's happens come up more than once in testing, not only this deck, but anyone who's ever played Fanatical Firebrand. You play enough games, and you'll kill an opponent with it eventually. So Fanatical Firebrand definitely goes in here. I think it's a fine enough card, but it's also in our tribe, so it just gives us another reason to play it. And because you know it's coming, I might as well go ahead and tell you about the King of Goblins. 4 copies of Goblin Chamber, because again, it's got to be here. This is just maybe like one of the top 3 cards in the format at present, and Goblins is still going to be able to play it after rotation and get extra tribal value out of it, so it gets better in this deck if you can imagine it. Turns out, too, that Chain Whirler is actually like the biggest creature in the deck in terms of raw stats. Trash Master is also a 3/3, but this has the first strike, so that puts it a little bit on top, and that's super relevant in combat a lot, It really intimidates smaller creatures that it didn't already kill when it entered the battlefield, so that's good. But it can even beat up on big dudes. Like if they swing in with a Vine Mare, you can block with a Goblin Chain Whirler, kill their mare, and live to tell the tale. So that's just Goblin Chain Whirler does all kinds of work right now. But to finish off the creatures, we'll talk about the 3 copies of Goblin Instigator here. And I don't think you have to push it to 4, and I think you might be able to push it down to 2, to be honest, but I want to play some number of this card. I have noticed that it's absent from some of the other Goblin lists I've seen people write on the internet so far, but I think that might be a mistake too. It's just so good for what we're trying to do. Trash Master out, then this is 4 power, which is pretty sweet for your 2 mana. Helps us go wide, which the deck wants to do. It's awesome as fodder, basically, for all of the different cards in the deck that want us to sack Goblins, which if you hadn't noticed is a ton, Like this is 2 cards off of Dark Dweller Oracle. That's pretty sweet. It's 4 damage off of a Siege Gang Commander. That's pretty awesome too. So I think the card just does so much that we want to do that I want to play some number of them. But let's go ahead and finish off the main deck, and it might be a little bit surprising, but there's actually only 4 non-creature spells in this entire list, and that's the 4 copies of Lightning Strike. Now, I do think we need a burn spell in the deck to provide a little bit of reach in the late game when we just need that last couple 3 damage, you know. It's really good to find this off of Dark Dweller Oracle in the late game. That's awesome. Clears a path, you know, kills other Chain Whirlers or just any small creatures or whatever, so we can get through. Just everything about Lightning Strike is a yes, but I didn't play Shock in the main deck. I did play all 4 in the sideboard for killing Llanowar Elves and other small guys, but mostly I don't think we need Shock that much. You know, we've got Siege Gang Commander, and once you get that, it's effectively a bunch of shocks, you know, so there's that. But we've also got Fanatical Firebrand for killing Llanowar Elves in the early game, if that's what you're worried about. I just think we're fairly covered, especially against smaller creatures, with our Chain Whirlers and Siege Gangs and stuff. So I just didn't think Shock was entirely necessary in the main deck, but don't worry. We'll talk about it when we get to the sideboard. It's here somewhere. But here's the mana base, a sleek 21 mountains, and that might not look too complicated, but this was actually like one of the hardest decisions in the deck. You know, we're going anywhere between 20 and 22 lands, and I'm still not convinced 22 isn't the right number. I think it very well might be, but it hasn't been too much of a problem in testing so far, at least, to play 21. You know, we've got Skirk Prospector, Wily Goblin, Goblin War Chief to either accelerate us or count as lands or reduce the cost of goblins. So, you know, we've got these 21 lands plus another 12 cards that effectively act as lands in a way. So I think the 21 is the right number. Again, haven't had too much trouble, but if you wanted to cut one card, it might be Goblin Instigator if you wanted to play that 22nd land. And here's the board, and with it comes the 4 copies of Shock I was talking about earlier. I've actually found that I board this in more often against control than I do against aggro. You know, sometimes we need more reach and ways to target planeswalkers without having to attack them. And Shock is pretty good at that, but I usually don't ever board in the full 4 copies. I just feel comfortable having 4 copies of Shock in the 75 somewhere. So that's why you see the 4 Shock. That and a sort of lack of options so far from what we know. Post-rotation as far as, you know, sideboard stuff for red. So this is definitely where we're going to park the Shocks. I want them in the 75. Now, one thing I really want this deck to have is a value engine of some kind. You know, I talked about this in the top 10 most improved cards video. When I talked about Siege Gang Commander, I would really like for there to be a recursive sort of value engine in the format to where we can get our goblins back after we sacrifice them. We don't quite have that, but we do have Squee, which is the closest thing to it in the format. It gives us more value off of Oracle every turn, and it gives us an extra 2 damage every single turn off of Siege Gang, which can actually win you a game if you have enough time and mana. Fight with Fire is also in there. This is mostly to take out Lyras and other big stuff post-board. You know, we might want to take out Steel Leaf Champions, things like that. Fight with Fire is with us, and even though we have a relatively low land count, it is not unheard of to cast a Fight with Fire. You know, we've got Skirk Prospector and Wily Goblin in the deck to help give us a little bit more mana than we're supposed to have at any given point. You know, sometimes if our board is big enough, we can just sack like 4 goblins, pay a few more mana, and kick a Fight with Fire for the win. So I've actually considered putting this card in the main deck in some number, whether it's just 1 or 2, but I don't think we necessarily need to do that. I will put it in the sideboard though, mostly for killing bigger creatures that we can otherwise handle, but it does have the secondary effect of being able to just end the game out of nowhere, which is pretty nice too. You also see the Vance's Blasting Cannons in there. Haven't seen this card in a while, but it's pretty good when resolved against control because it just gives you an extra card every single turn. That's really, really good against control and other slower decks for just winning the card advantage war. But if you do ever get this flipped over, it's also reach against control. Just all of those things are good. We've also got the Banefire in there. Again, against control, you may be noticing a theme if you're paying attention. You know, we're fairly bad, especially for what is ostensibly a fast aggro deck, especially in games 2 and 3 against control. You know, we really want to be able to side in and win that game, and most of our sideboard is devoted to winning that matchup. We have other problem matchups, like Mono Green is not a great matchup. They go over the top of us. We've got Fight with Fire, and to a lesser extent, Shock against their Llanowar Elves. But Fight with Fire, even Vance's Blasting Cannons when we expect the game to go long against Mono Green. There are options in there against those decks, but I mostly wanted to focus beating control in game 2 and 3, and Banefire is a huge part of that. If we ever actually do get hit with Settle the Wreckage, then, well, we just go get like anywhere between 3 to 6 lands, and we just burn them out with Banefire in the next turn. Pretty easy, no questions asked, and we can play multiple copies of this so that we can burn a Banefire earlier on in the game, or we can just draw it reliably. You know, a lot of sideboards I've noticed are playing like 1 or 2 Banefire, but I want to draw it way more reliably than that against control decks. So I'm playing 3 in here, and I'm also playing a mountain, by the way, because if you haven't noticed, we go a little bit bigger after boards. You know, we've only got 1 card that costs 1 mana. Everything else costs at least 3, if not more. So I want to go ahead and have that 22nd land I was talking about in the sideboard for when we go a little bit more mid-range in game 2 and 3. But here are your power rankings right here. A final score of 64 is what we've got here for the deck so far. That may all change depending on what we see in Guilds of Ravnica or how the metagame shapes up. This could actually just get better scores for that. But, you know, 64 is really, really not bad. For a deck that's only $35. If you follow the channel, you know that usually these, you know, $20 to $40 decks are in the, you know, low 60s, sometimes the high 50s. So a score of 64, mid 60s, that is really, really good. And that's because we're fairly decent in a few categories, even though we're really low budget. You know, we're a very, very synergistic deck. Our offense is actually ridiculous. You know, again, we play 35 Goblins, and we've got a ton of explosive turn sequences in the deck. So we're actually really, really fast. And I mean fast. Like, there are multiple ways that you can goldfish up a turn 4 win with this deck. It's not even that hard. And a turn 5 win is easy peasy. There are myriad turn 5 wins in the deck. As a matter of fact, you can win on turn 5 with just 2 cards, theoretically. You know, War Chief on turn 3, swing in with it. Turn 4, Siege Gang, swing in with everything. Turn 5, leave your mana open, swing in with all your goblins again. You've dealt 16 damage. Theoretically, up to this point, and your mana's open, so you can tap all 4 of your lands, sack 2 goblins, hit them for the last 4 damage. That's 20 damage on 2 cards by turn 5. So you can imagine that if you got any other goblins on the first couple of turns of the game in this turn sequence, then you've done pretty well. You know, so like you're almost guaranteed to win that game. If you get a strong enough start outside of just those 2 cards. So this thing is actually ridiculous. Again, there are just multiple ways to goldfish up ludicrous, unbelievable turn sequences, and it performs pretty well in the field against an actual living, breathing opponent as well. You know, this deck has just so many play lines that are super aggressive. Explosive, again, is the word to use. There's just a lot this deck can do in the opening turns, and then supplement later on. You know, any explosive early game plays into a Siege Gang commander is always going to be good. You know, same thing with Trashmaster. If you get 2 or 3 goblins on the board in the first few turns into Trashmaster, that is almost always going to be a great way to start a game. So this deck has multiple good play lines and is going to put together a decent first 4 or 5 turns, almost no matter what you draw in your opening hand. But with that, I think I'm tapped out for now. I am sure I'll have more to say about this deck in the very near future after rotation. Even if we don't get Goblin 1 in Guilds of Ravnica, you know, I'll probably still want to revisit this deck because I think it's going to be one of the more popular and important tribal decks after rotation, if only, because it's going to be one of the only feasible red decks on the horizon. So if you want to play mono red after rotation, it looks, for the time being, as though you're roped into this, but I wouldn't feel too bad about it. This deck can do some pretty righteous stuff. So check this thing out. Again, if you're interested in doing that, click the link in the description, go over to TCG Player and get this deck for the lowest price you can get it on the interwebs. Also, make sure you leave a comment, like the video, do all the stuff that puts me in more recommended feeds and gives me better metrics on YouTube and blah, blah, blah. You know, I'm just trying to get the numbers up, so do all that stuff. Subscribe if you haven't done that yet and you like my face or you just like what you saw here today. Make sure you sub for more content. We do deck decks all the time. Top 10 lists coming up very soon. I'm trying to do a top 10 list every week until rotation, plus spoiler videos after rotation, all those deck decks. You want to be in for that content, so make sure you sub, hit the bell for the notifications. Check out the link for Patreon if you want to help out around here. I would greatly appreciate that, and thanks to all the people who are already doing it. You're the whole reason I get to do this for a living, and I can't thank you enough. So if you're already with the Patreon, you're amazing. Keep doing what you're doing. I love you. But if you're not with it yet and you're interested in signing up, I'll leave a link down there. Aside from that, just follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev, and I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Make sure you spread love and be kind.